These cult classics paved the way for pretty much every comedy and sci-fi show that have followed in their wake, despite the efforts of Ivy League-educated network execs who just didn't get it. Creator Joss Whedon has described Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a cross between My So-Called Life and the X-Files. It's no wonder then that combining the strengths of the two other cult classics would result in one of the most beloved cult classics of all time. Premiering on the WB in 1997 before switching networks to UPN in 2001, Buffy ran for a total of 7 seasons until 2003. It also launched the spin-off series Angel along the way, and has enjoyed a healthy afterlife in the form of comic books continuing the story. Sarah Michelle Gellar starred as the titular Buffy Summers, whose coming-of-age journey as she saves the world story struck a chord with a generation of geeks and inspired many supernatural shows that followed in its wake. In Season 5, one of the more unique story arcs started up, with Michelle Trachtenberg suddenly appearing as Buffy's sister Dawn after years of hinting she existed. The show was also praised as a defining work of pop feminism. However, the eventual revelation that Whedon had allegedly mistreated female cast members forced a more critical reassessment of the show's gender politics. Despite those unfortunate behind-the-scenes complications, Buffy is still highly regarded for the trail that it blazed.
So, the Slayer.
Yeah. That's me.
It's easy to imagine an alternate universe where Freaks and Geeks isn't considered a cult classic, but just a classic, period. Alas, it never had much of a chance. The series' mix of humor and drama was relatable to anyone who felt awkward in high school. But Garth Ancier, president of NBC Entertainment at the time, didn't relate, as he attended a private boarding school and Princeton University. Ancier simply didn't know what to do with the show, and executives kept pushing for the characters to be cooler and have more victories, which was exactly the opposite of what creator Paul Feig was attempting. With terrible time slots and entire episodes that never aired, Freaks and Geeks couldn't last beyond a single season. But Feig and crew had the last laugh, as pretty much everyone who worked on Freaks and Geeks has gone on to define popular comedy in the early 21st century. Feig and executive producer Judd Apatow would direct and produce blockbuster movies like Bridesmaids and Knocked Up. Meanwhile, John Francis Daley went from playing a Dungeons & Dragons geek to writing and directing the big-budget movie Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Other actors who have thrived since their time at William McKinley High include Seth Rogen, Linda Cardellini, Jason Segel, and Busy Phillips, just to name a few. When the sci-fi conspiracy series The X-Files debuted on Fox in 1993, it was quintessential cult TV. It wasn't exactly a major rating sensation, but those who watched it were absolutely hooked. Within 5 seasons, though, it was basically a pop culture phenomenon. At its best, it balanced compelling Monster of the Week episodes with a complex, overarching mythology. Meanwhile, the skeptic-believer dynamic between FBI Special Agents Dana Scully and Fox Mulder inspired plenty of fanfiction.
The answers are there. You just have to know where to look.
That's why they put the I in FBI.
Alas, the success wouldn't last, with ratings declining over the final 4 seasons as fans debated if the show was losing its touch, after a movie version came out in 1998. Initially ending in 2002, another big screen adaptation came out in 2008. 2 additional seasons eventually arrived as well in 2016 and 2018, but both were pretty much hated. A full-on reboot is now in the works, but it's questionable if a show that was so quintessentially 90s can still work in such a vastly different cultural environment. How did a show as strange as Twin Peaks ever make its way onto TV in 1990, let alone become a hit? Surreal filmmaker David Lynch was certainly an offbeat choice to create a network drama, but his collaboration with Hill Street Blues writer Mark Frost nevertheless produced an enticing mix of small-town drama, quirky comedy, and supernatural darkness. In its first season, Twin Peaks was the show that everyone was talking about, as viewers tried to solve the mystery of who killed Laura Palmer alongside FBI agent Dale Cooper. Alas, ABC executives demanded that the mystery be answered early in Season 2, and the show lost direction shortly thereafter. Lynch and Frost became less and less involved as the ratings declined until returning for the Season 2 finale, which ended up being the series finale, at least at the time. A prequel film, 1992's Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, abandoned the series' campier elements in favor of sheer horror. It earned polarized reviews at the time, but has since undergone a positive critical reappraisal. A 3rd season, entitled Twin Peaks: The Return, aired on Showtime in 2017, and solidified the series' legacy as a brilliant and baffling cult classic.
What year is this?
Before David Cross starred on Arrested Development and before Bob Odenkirk was Saul Goodman, there was Mr. Show with Bob and David, a surreal sketch comedy show that ran for 4 seasons on HBO from 1995 to 1998.
What if, for your show, you guys, played different characters?
The list of actors mixing it up alongside Cross and Odenkirk reads like a comedy hall of fame, with Jack Black, Sarah Silverman, and SpongeBob SquarePants voice actor Tom Kenny all making memorable appearances. Even if you've never seen Mr. Show, you've almost certainly come across one of the many comedy series that have cited it as an inspiration. The 4-episode pseudo-revival entitled With Bob and David arrived on Netflix in 2015. Launching with an hour-long pilot in 1988, the Canadian sketch comedy show The Kids in the Hall ran for 5 seasons on CBC between 1989 and 1995. In the United States, the first 3 seasons aired on HBO and gained enough attention that the last 2 aired on CBS. Saturday Night Live creator Lorne Michaels produced the show, but it had a much stranger style of comedy that was closer to something like Monty Python than SNL. Kids in the Hall was both controversial and groundbreaking for its unabashed queer sensibility. Cast member Scott Thompson was openly gay, and the rest of the group were quite comfortable with dressing up as women in homoerotic humor.
What are you talking about? Are you completely breast? I only boobs you in here to tit a letter. Besides, Hooters, I very happily melt from your breast.
The troupe's follow-up projects, including the 1996 film Brain Candy and the 2010 miniseries Death Comes to Town, earned mixed reviews. But the sketch version of Kids in the Hall eventually got a well-received 6th season on Amazon Prime in 2022. If My So-Called Life had premiered a few years later, it probably would have fit in right alongside the teen drama lineups of the WB and UPN. Instead, it was a bit too ahead of its time on ABC in 1994, and it was canceled after a single low-rated season. This despite the fact that pretty much everyone who watched it loved it, including teenagers, parents, critics, and network executives. Starring Claire Danes as high schooler Angela Chase, My So-Called Life avoided the cheesy soap opera style of the era's other teen shows in favor of grappling seriously with real social issues. The parents got as much character development as the kids, a decision made out of necessity due to the child actors' limited shooting hours, but one that also helped the show connect with viewers of all ages. It might have been canceled too soon, but its influence is still felt decades later. Cartoon Network made a name for itself in a bizarre way in 1994 by repurposing footage from the forgotten 60s superhero cartoon Space Ghost and Dino Boy, and mixing it with interviews with any minor celebrity willing to play along with the joke. The result was the surreal late-night talk show Space Ghost Coast to Coast. The low cost of producing the series allowed it to get extremely off the wall throughout its 11 seasons. Space Ghost appealed to an older crowd than most of Cartoon Network's programming, and it ended up forming the basis of its Adult Swim block beginning in 2001. So, if you're a fan of anything from Aqua Teen Hunger Force to Rick and Morty, then you have Space Ghost to thank.
Your presence makes any kind of progress in the universe impossible.
Hold on a second, Conan.
In early March 2025, George Lowe, the voice of Space Ghost, passed away at the age of 67. Anime is generally considered a cult medium in the United States, and when you're talking about 90s anime cult classics, you can't ignore Cowboy Bebop. It had pretty much everything going against it when it premiered in 1998, but it's still absolutely beloved by its passionate fanbase over 25 years later. It defied the popular anime trends of the era by foregoing giant robots and opting for a jazz soundtrack instead of J-pop, which allowed this genre-blending show about outer space bounty hunters to become something unique and timeless. Cowboy Bebop's initial run on TV Tokyo only aired 12 of the series' 26 episodes, with the rest deemed too violent for broadcast. It eventually became a cult favorite among American viewers as the first animated series on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block in 2001. Network programmers kept rerunning it for years, not due to exceptional ratings, but because they simply loved the show. And over time, more and more fans share that love. Cowboy Bebop's Western influences made it a particularly effective gateway anime for newcomers, and even a disastrous live-action Netflix adaptation couldn't taint its legacy.
Do not fear death. Death is always at our side.
Mystery Science Theater 3000 debuted all the way back in 1988 on the local Minneapolis TV station KTMA. In the decades since, it's made its way around a number of different networks and streaming services. It was a mainstay on Comedy Central in the years before South Park and The Daily Show, and then it bounced over to the Sci-Fi Channel in 1997. The premise was that it was a showcase for some of the worst B-movies ever made, but with a human host and his 2 robot friends making these stinkers bearable with their running commentary.
And the crowd goes wild. Yay!
Made on the cheap by passionate outsiders, MST3K was built for a cult following from the very beginning. To spread awareness back when Comedy Central had limited distribution, viewers were encouraged to keep circulating the tapes. Many years after the series' initial cancellation, fans were able to crowdfund 2 revivals, with 2 seasons on Netflix and one hosted on the series' own website called the Gizmoplex. The sci-fi series Babylon 5 ran for 5 seasons from 1993 to 1998, with the first 4 airing on the now defunct Primetime Entertainment Network and the final one on TNT. At the time, the show was unusual for its complex, pre-planned narrative structure, which was described as a novel for television by its creator, J. Michael Straczynski. Along with the X-Files, it was hugely influential in shifting genre TV in a more serialized direction, and the fact that it actually got to complete its full 5-season plan feels like something of a miracle. Set on a space station where human and alien diplomats negotiate in the aftermath of an interplanetary war, Babylon 5 drew inspiration from real-world history and mythology to address big political and philosophical ideas. Ahead of its time in a number of ways, it was among the first TV shows to directly engage with its fan base on the internet. It was also groundbreaking for its heavy use of computer-generated special effects, even though they may look a bit dated now. The biggest TV cult phenomenons of the 90s tended to be either sci-fi or comedy, so a combination of the two pretty much guaranteed cult classic status. Red Dwarf initially ran for 8 seasons on BBC Two from 1988 to 1999, before being revived for 4 more seasons and a special between 2007 and 2020. It was essentially the defining British sci-fi show of the 90s, partly because it was basically the only British sci-fi show of that decade. BBC executives at the time weren't particularly interested in the genre though, so it took a while for Red Dwarf to get off the ground. But its strong sense of humor kept it going strong. Despite critical acclaim and a passionate fanbase, the cast and crew always felt like outsiders at the network. Lead actors Craig Charles and Danny John Jules weren't even invited to celebrate the show's 1994 Emmy win because the venue was already at capacity and they were reportedly deemed to be fire risks.